Sometimes big problems come in small packages. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. We are here today to discuss another War of the Spark spoiler, a particular character from Magic history. Today, we will be discussing Krenko. Now, Krenko has been given two different cards here throughout the history of Magic in terms of him showing up on an actual card, and he hasn't had a lot of changes to his actual character. So let's talk about how the two different versions of him represent him, whether the new one does a better job. For those of you who don't know, let's do some background information on Krenko, because he does have some legendary exploits. Unlike a lot of other goblins, which are kind of cowardly, goblins are greedy and violent, but they are, fairly cowardly, and they don't have a lot of initiative. Now, Krenko stands out as a very special goblin who has a lot of initiative and a lot of capability. He's smarter and he's more cunning than your everyday goblin. And this is the part of the reason that goblins are drawn to him like he's honey. And they're all flying on in to say, give me some of that sweet Krenko honey. Let's start by taking a look at what he started out as. So we started out with Krenko Mob Boss back in the days of 2013, right? He is a 2-red, 2-colorless, 3/3 legendary goblin warrior. His ability is tap him, create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control. And the flavor text says he displays a perverse charisma fueled by avarice, highly dangerous, recommend civil sanctions. And this is from Egmond Sarv Azorius Hussar. And we actually even have a criminal wanted kind of poster with him set up on the background, kind of the same way that police do. You can see him here. Now you'll notice that there's a shadowy version of Lazov behind him. That's actually Mr. Taz. This is one of Krenko's patrons, all right? So this is the original version of Krenko Mob Boss that we're dealing with. He grows the number of goblins. Each time he taps, he increases the number of goblins, and it can just grow exponentially. And he is a 3/3. There were some cards that came along with him back at that time. You had Krenko's Command, and that's where he makes 2 1/1 tokens. Not he, sorry. You make 2 1/1s. It's a sorcery. You don't actually have to have Krenko out to use this. The flavor text says, goblins are eager to follow orders, especially when those orders involve stealing, hurting, annoying, eating, destroying, or swearing. So goblins want to cause problems. They're like a bunch of unruly teenage boys. You troublemakers! And then you've got Krenko's Enforcer, who's a beefier, more brutish individual who serves under Krenko to show that he has a little bit more sway than other goblins would. He's got these enforcers working under him, and you can see this guy is 3 mana for a 2/2. He's a hulking bruiser. He's got Intimidate, which means he's intimidating, obviously. He just likes to break legs. Collecting the debt is a bonus. So Krenko knows the right kind of people to bring to serve under him. And he's actually referred to on the Fervor enchant from Magic 2013 as well, where all your creatures have haste. You take a look at the artwork, you can see this army of goblins, this squad of goblins ready to go forth. Clearly, this ties into Krenko's ability to make a bunch of goblins. It's not really him making them. He makes the tokens in the game, but it's really just his notoriety and the way that he does business drawing people in. So the flavor text says, we won't sit like lazy gobslugs waiting for death to come to us. We will bring death, shiny, sharp, to our enemies. Krenko Mob Boss. And actually, the Gobslug is an insult that he uses multiple times. You can see that show up again more recently in Ravnica Allegiance, where on Spear Spewer, this is an individual who serves under Krenko. So you've got your 1 mana 0/2 defender, taps to do 1 damage to each player, and the flavor text says, don't waste time aiming, you lazy gobslug, fire. So Krenko's just saying, just fire those bolts, I don't care where they go. He doesn't care, mayhem, whatever happens, he will turn it to his advantage. There is a reason that Lazov has chosen to hire Krenko time and again. Krenko is a very effective mercenary leader who has pulled off some amazing situations. Basically, Lazov hired him to go and steal angel feathers from an angel that was being detained. The old leader of the Boros Guild before Aurelia took over was Feather. And Feather had been encapsulated in a specific shield of magic. Now Lazov presented Krenko with a shiny magical shiv and said, I want you to go ahead and acquire a feather from Feather for me. So he was sent in. Krenko kind of scouts out the situation. He looks for a prime opportunity. He sees that the Boros are kind of in turmoil. With the whole shift in leadership, there's an opportunity for him to slide in and cause some problems to acquire what he needs. So he goes in, and he's just a goblin, right? So he just slides in. They think that he's just another goblin from the Gruul. There's tons of goblins in the Boros Legion. And actually, Krenko didn't understand why any goblins would want to serve under the Boros until he finally infiltrated their base and noticed, oh, wait, look at all the food they provide. So all the goblins serving under the Boros to fill their bellies. You've got Krenko in there. He spends a couple of days actually hanging out, casing the joint, trying to figure out where Feather is located, interacting with the other goblins, making friends, making enemies, and then he decides he's going to spring into action. He starts to create distractions. So on one floor, he's whispering rumors to set people or whatever. Another floor, he's out there settling grudges, punching people in the face who talk smack to him. Another floor, he's setting off spark bombs. Boom, 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 boom. And then he heads to a further floor and starts detonating real explosives. And under the guise of all of this, he slips into the room where Feather is trapped inside cocooning magic. And he pulls out his little enchanted shiv and he goes, bam! And he slams it against the shield. Not working. He can't figure out what's going on. But he's not stupid like the other goblins. He's a crafty one. So he goes, well, Mr. Taz who is Lazov, by the way, wouldn't have given me the shiv unless I was meant to use it. So he feels all around the sphere that's cocooning Feather, and he finds this one hard spot. He can't see it, but he can feel it. And so he turns the shiv around and he uses the pommel of it to smash inwards on that one spot, which disintegrates the magic shield encasing Feather. Feather falls to the ground. He quickly runs in and snatches up 2 feathers, not 1, but 2 of the feathers off of Feather. And then he shouts out, yelling, help, help! The angel has escaped and she's attacking me. So a bunch of soldiers run in and Krenko darts off. Boom, he's got his prize. He slips out of the Boros stronghold and returns the feather, I should say, presents it to Lazov. But he only presents 1 feather. He keeps 1 as a treasure for himself and makes no mention of it because he's crafty. He sees the value in keeping that sort of thing. In fact, he's so crafty that he has got to dine in some of the most epic places. There's this location called the Millennial, which is like a floating restaurant that only the super rich and super elite get to dine at. Most people on Ravnica will never get to go there, but Krenko has got to dine there because he is a heavy hitter in terms of his connections, in terms of his wealth, because he is crafty. That's part of what makes the goblins want to serve him. He gets into a turf war with the Shattergang brothers. You know the Shattergang brothers? That's a particular card. There's 3 of them, where there was 3 of them. One of them ends up getting taken out. Basically, an arms drop goes wrong. Krenko is there to purchase some arms from the Shattergang brother. It all goes wrong. He ends up taking out one of the Shattergang brothers, which makes the other Shattergang brothers go nuts. They want revenge on him. Gideon actually had to intervene in this scenario because he saw what was going on. Krenko and the Shattergang brothers are guildless individuals on Ravnica, and the guilds were fine with just leaving him alone to begin with. They were just like, whatever, he's just affecting the guildless, we're going to leave it at that. So Gideon originally went and filled out the paperwork to try and petition, hey, can you please take care of Krenko? But he decides, you know what, this isn't happening fast enough. So Gideon goes to collect Krenko up himself. Krenko actually ends up shivving Gideon. Gideon goes and drops Krenko off, and one of the officers, when he's dropping Krenko off for detention, is to be detained in prison, obviously, not like, oh, you know, you better write down these lines after school sort of detention. Anyways, Gideon's dropping off Krenko, and they go, are you okay, Gideon? And he's like, yeah, he stabbed me. And Krenko's like, twice! He's so pleased with himself that he managed to jab Gideon twice with a shiv. So Krenko he's involved in all these little heists. He's got like the low-level crime that he's involved with, but then he's also got high-level stuff where he's working for Lazov. He's such a problem that Gideon has to take him off the streets, because between what he's doing and the Shatter Gang trying to get revenge, Tin Street is just going nuts with explosions, everything going crazy. So how do we get to the point where if he got arrested by Gideon and thrown into prison, how did he get back out on the streets? Well, what happened was he's in a lower security prison. He causes a huge riot to happen, and they transfer him to maximum security. Now, I don't know why he wasn't already in maximum security, because in all honesty, he had been involved in other exploits. He had actually gone against the Orzhov to rob the Orzhov, and at one point he's there, and they're all like closing in on him, and he grabs a thrall and threatens to destroy the thrall unless they back off, not realizing the Orzhov don't care about thralls. They don't mean anything. So when Krenko realizes, he stuffs the thrall with explosive and blows him up and uses that to escape. He's totally a master of taking advantage on a moment's whim of what's going on and just getting out of there. So he causes this big problem in the prison that he's in. They decided they're going to transfer him to maximum security. But that was all according to Krenko's plan, because he has associates who help to spring him when he's being transported from one prison to another. And from that point onwards, Krenko is actually at large and loose. Now, in the Dungeons & Dragons Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, you do have an adventure where you can capture Krenko, but that's not canon, that's not part of the story. So in the real world of Ravnica, Krenko is still loose, and now he is the Tin Street boss. So let's take a look at the Tin Street boss. The Tin Street boss is a 1/2, I keep thinking 2/3 because I think of him after his first attack. So 1 red, 2 colors for a 1/2. Whenever he attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on him, then you create a number of 1/1 red goblin creature tokens equal to Krenko's power. And the flavor text says, after the people flee, but before the enemy arrives, that's grabbing time. I love the flavor of this. The artwork shows him holding up some jewelry with another fistful of jewelry on the other hand. You've got goblins behind him looting, squabbling with each other. He is clearly very, very pleased with himself. Now, you may notice at first that he is smaller than the other version. The other version is 3/3. This version is 1/2. I actually like this 1/2 version better that grows as he goes on an escapade, because the original mob boss would tap to create more tokens. But the idea of him growing in power and stature amongst the goblins as he attacks makes way more sense to me. If you think about it, every time he attacks, it's another escapade, it's more exploits, he grows in power and stature and attracts more goblins to him as a result, because they want to follow a powerful leader. So overall, I really like the idea of using the attack phase as where he grows in status, because he's always on the move, he's always taking advantage of situations, he's teaching the other goblins, drawing them to them, using them as pawns. So for me, this is a really well executed version of him. I like it better, and yes, it starts out smaller, but it can grow larger. Krenko Mob Boss can never get bigger, but Krenko Tin Street Kingpin can keep growing and growing as he gains in power. You know, he's got powerful people backing him, like Mr. Taz Lazov from the Dimir, who's paying him handsome sums and giving him magical gear to go on these adventures. So overall, this Krenko sits really well with me. I think it's a fantastic execution of the card. Let me know what you guys think. We're gonna roll the golden scroll. The people who have my back on Patreon or through channel memberships, thank you very much for supporting my channel. It is meaningful. If you have not considered doing that yourself, please do so. Would happy to have you on. I'd be happy to have you on the scroll. That's all for now. See you tomorrow, my friends.